This is the second part of recreating Snake game in Unity Engine, and we are using Bolt for that, which is visual scripting, so you don't need to know anything about coding. Last time we have added some basic snake movement and changing of the directions, as well as some apples that when the snake eats them, it will spawn another segment of the snake into the game. And today we will make the segments actually follow the snake and also change the sprites of the segments depending if they should be horizontal or vertical. Right now we have in the game just the head, so I will add the segment and also put it under the snake. If you have a prefab like this and you want to edit it, one thing that you might want to do is right click and go under the prefab, and you can just unpack the prefab so that you can edit the values. So just position the segment on the -1 on the Y. And how do we do the following of these segments? It is going to be actually pretty simple. So for example, when we have the head like this, and we move it to the left like this, we want the segment to go to the last position of the head, which is here. So in the head script, we can just define a variable, last position, and this will be a vector3, which is used for the position. And here in the part where we are actually moving, we want to first set the last position to the current position and then move. So we can just do set last position. And set it to the current position, so just position get, and we will use the transform. And we don't need to connect anything to the input, because we have the script on the object of which we want to get the position. And now we can use the custom events that we have been using last time again, because we want first to move the head, and then we want to move the segment which comes after the head. So we can use this node, trigger custom event. We can name it, for example, move, and this event will be called on the segment which comes after the head. So we will need to call it on other object, not on this object. And we will do this by using node getChild, transform getChild, which will allow us to get a child of some parent. And the parent for the last segment is actually the same as the parent for the head. So we can just use parent get. And now which index is it? Well, the head is on the index 0 and the segment is on the index 1. So we can set here index 1. And because the output of this node is a transform and input of this one is actually a game object, we can use just transform that game object. And like this, we should be able to trigger a custom event on the segment. And here I will create custom event. Again, it is going to be named move. And to know that it is working, we can, for example, just do debug.log. And we can see that each time that the head moves, it is telling us that it is working. Another thing that I will do is just set a starting direction for the head, because you can see that when we start the game, it is actually not going anywhere. So we can set it to, for example, 1 and 1, like this. Using this custom event, we are just telling the segment that it should move, but we are not telling it where it should move. And this is going to be the last position of the head. So for this, we can use arguments, which will allow us to get some value from the event. And on the head, we can do the same thing, just add one argument. And the argument is going to be the last position of the head. So we can get it like this. And now we are just sending a flow as well as the position to the custom event, which can be pretty useful. So now we can just use position set. And again, it is the transform. So when this event triggers, we'll just set the position of this segment to this position. And you can see that this is working. The segment is moving with the head. It doesn't look the best right now, but it definitely is working. But you can see that when another segment spawns in, it is no longer working. So what we will do is that when this move gets triggered, we will check if there is another segment after this current segment, and if there is, we will actually trigger another event, which is the same, the move, and send the last position of this segment. So on this segment, we can just create a variable, which will be the last position, the same as for the head. Before we set the position of the segment, we want to set the last position. So set last position, set it to the current position. Then we need to check if there is another segment after this one. So if, and how do we know if there is another segment? We can just get the child count of the snake. So for example, if I would have 3 segments like this, it will tell us 3, and we can get an index of the current segment. So for example, on this one, it would tell us 1. And if the child count of the snake is bigger than the index of this one plus 1, then it means that there is one more segment after this one, so that we can trigger the custom event once more. So as I said, we will get child count of the parent of this segment, which is the snake. And if this number is greater than index of this current segment, so we can use sibling index get. And to this number we need to add 1, because the indexes are starting from 0 and not from 1. If this is true, we can again trigger custom event, the move event. We'll add 1 argument, and on which object we want to trigger it, we will need to get child of the parent, and on which index? It is going to be the sibling index, which is this current index, plus 1. And because this input is game object, we'll again need to get the game object from the transform. And the argument is going to be the last position of this segment. Okay, so with 1 segment it is working fine, and we'll see what will happen now. Yeah, we can see that it is following the snake as it should. As you might see, when the segment first spawns in, it is in the middle, but we can fix this pretty easily. We will go into the head script, and when we are spawning the segment, we will just set the position to the last position of last segment. Again, we need to get child of the parent, and the index will be of the child count of the parent, but we need to subtract 1, because as I said, the indexes are starting from 0. So like this, we should have the last segment game object, and we just need to get object variable from the segment, so we can connect the object here, and the name is just the last position. Make sure that you have the correct name, otherwise it is not going to work, and we can set the position of the new segment to this position. Yeah, and you can see that when we eat the apple, the segment actually spawns at the end of the snake and is correctly following the snake like this. Now we will make rotation of the snake's head, so when we are going to the left, the head is looking to the left too. There are a few ways how you could do that. You could obviously just take the head and just rotate it by 90 degrees, or you could change the sprite of the head, which we will be doing, so just set another sprite. Or you can do this using animations. So if you have also animations for your snake, you probably don't want to be just changing the sprite, but also changing the animation using blend trees, which is what we will use for the segments, but for the head we will be just changing the sprites. We want to be changing these sprites all the time, so we can use update, and then if the direction is equal to something, we can set the according sprite. If the head is looking, for example, to the right, which is the direction 1, 0, 0, we can use sprite renderer, which is the component on which we want to set the sprite. So sprite renderer, sprite, and just set. So if this is true, we can set the sprite on this sprite renderer to something. So for example, to the right. Now we can just copy it a few times and it should be working. The code should be looking like this. It is nothing too complicated. But again, if you are using animations, you might want to use the second approach, which we'll use for the segments. And you can see that the head is correctly rotating. This was pretty simple. Now let's get to the animations of the segments. This is going to be a bit harder, but I think it is useful to know how to actually change the animations. So we can hit Window and open Animation and Animation. We'll select the object that we want to animate, which is the segment. And don't worry if you have just one sprite, it's totally fine. So we can create an animation clip, which is holding some animation, and choose the folder. So in the assets, animations, and we can start, for example, with the horizontal animation. And because there is multiple sprites, the snake can be either going to the up and right, or left and right, and so on. I will be naming them just by the directions. So if it is horizontal, it is going from left to right. So I will name it just like this. You can see that on the segment object, it has also created an animator component, which is controlling all of the animations. And if we want to create another animation clip, we can just click here and create new clip. So I will create all of the clips for all of the animations. Here I have all of the animations. I hope that I didn't forget any. And you can see that I have also made the animations for the ends. And now we will need to add the sprites to the animation. So I will put the animation window up here. And again, select the segment object. And we can start, for example, from the down left. And I will open the sprites. So the down left is going from down to the left, which is this one. So I will just take the sprite and put it here like this. If you have multiple sprites that should make an animation, you can put all of them to the timeline like this. And we'll do the same thing for all of the other animations. And now if we choose one of the animation clips and we can just reset it like this, we can see that the sprite of this segment has changed. Now we will jump into the animator, in which we will be changing the individual animations. So go into Window, Animation, and Animator. We'll select the segment object, and you can see that all of the animations are here, but we don't need these ones, so we can just delete them. Don't worry, they will still be in the project. And we'll just create an empty state, which will be for the start, because from the entry, you need to have a default state. So this one is not going to be anything, it is just going to be here. And what we will be using is the anyState. And from the anyState, we will connect it to two blend trees. And the blend trees will allow us to change the animations on some values. Each of the segment sprites can be defined by two values. One of them is the before segment and another one is the after segment. It is just the positions of the segment before and after. So for example, if the before segment is up and the after segment is right, it means that it is going from up to right. So we know which segment this one actually is. And if there is before segment up and no segment down, it means that it is the end. We will right click in the animator, create state, and the blend tree. As I said, we will create two of them. And we can just make transition from the anyState to the blend trees. And we want to make sure that the transition from the anyState to the blend tree happens instantly. So we will select the arrow, and down here in the settings, we can set the transition to the 0 seconds, and the same with this one. so that it just happens instantly. Here on the left, you can see some of the parameters that we will be using in these blend trees. We can delete this one, and we will add two parameters. It is kind of bad that they have to be floats if you want to use them in the blend trees, because it is not really convenient for the directions, but I didn't find any other way how to do it. So we will add a float, and this one is going to be the before segment, and another one for the after segment. You might be wondering, how do I tell the direction in a number? We can do it that, for example, point 2 is to the right, point 4 is down, point 6 is left, and point 8 is up. This is the way that I made it. Why do we have two blend trees? This one is going to be for the snake end. So if there is no after segment, we will just trigger this one, and we can do this by selecting this arrow and going to the conditions. So if the after segment is less than, for example, 0.1, so that there is no segment after, we can just trigger the snake end. And if the after segment is greater than 0.1, it means that there is some after segment, so we can trigger this other blend tree. We'll start with the snake end blend tree, because here we will have only one of the volume, which is the before segment. So we can double click this blend tree, and we can set the parameter to the before segment, and we can just easily add motion fields, which will be those animations. We will have 4 of them, because if there is no after segment, then there are 4 choices to choose from. We can untick automate thresholds, so that we can set our own threshold. If the threshold, so the value of the before segment, is 0.2, which we have defined that is on the right, then we can just set the motion to the end right. If the threshold is 0.4, which means that we are going down, we can set the motion to the end down, and do this for all of the other motions. So it should look like this, and you can see that when I'm changing the before segment value, the segment right here is rotating like it should. And now we will do this whole motion setup for the other blend tree, but here it is going to be a bit harder, because we will have two values, so we can set the blend type to 2D simple directional, and the first parameter can be the before segment, and the second one can be the after segment. And now we need to add a lot of motions. The position X is the before segment, and the Y is the after segment. So if the before segment is, for example, up, which we have defined as 0.8, and the after is, for example, 0.4, which is down, it means that we should set the motion to up, down. When the before segment is 0.4, which is down, and the after segment is 0.8, it is pretty much the same animation, but we still need to define it here. And like this, you will need to define it for all of these scenarios. I know that all of these motions and numbers might look a bit complicated for you, but trust me, it will be worth it when you will see it moving. This is all for the blend trees and animator setup. Now we will need to change the before segment and after segment values through the visual scripting. We will get to the segment script graph, and here we can use node animator set float, with which we will be able to set the float, which is one of the parameters in the animator, and we will use the first one with the name and value. So the name can be before segment, make sure that it is the same as in the animator, and we can just set the volume. The animator can remain on this one, because the script is on the same object on which we have the animator. And how do we know the volume? We can just take the segment that is before this segment, get its position, and subtract the current position of this segment from the before segment, and we will just get if the segment is on right, on left, down, or up. For this, we'll need to get child of the parent of this segment. And because we want to get the before segment, we will get the sibling index and subtract 1 from it. Now we have the before segment transform, and we can just get a position from it. We will also get a position of this current segment and just subtract the positions like this. And if the outcome of the subtract is, for example, equal, again we will use vector 3 literal. If it is equal, for example, to the right, so like this, so if this is true, then we can set the before segment to right, which is 0.2, like this. The code should look like this. So if the outcome is equal to the 1, which is to the right, we will set the before segment to 0.2, which is also right. If it is equal to -1, which is left, we will set it to -6. If it is equal to 0 and 1, which is up, we will set it to 0.8. Otherwise, we will set it to 0.4. Now let's get to setting the after segment, but I'm not going to be making the code longer to the right because it already looks a bit messy. I will just move this part a bit and use node sequence, which basically allows us to split the flow into multiple parts. And for the after segment, we will need one more condition because there might actually not be another after segment. So we'll need to ask if, and again we have already done this, if the child count of the parent is greater than the sibling index plus 1. So if this is true, it means that there is some after segment, but if it is false, it means that there is no after segment, and we can set the after segment to 0. And if there is some after segment, we can just copy this part of the code and just change some stuff, connect it to the if like this, and we only need to add 1 to the sibling index because we want to be getting the after segment, so just add 1 to this. And instead of setting the before segment, we'll be setting the after segment, and this should be all of the changes that we need to make to this code. One mistake I made is that I added the animator only to this segment, so we can just select the prefab, hit add component, animator, and just select the controller that we have created like this. And we can see that it seems to be kind of working. The animations are changing, but there might be some stuff wrong. Here in the script graph of the segment, I also noticed one more mistake, which is that I'm moving the next segment before I'm actually setting the animator. So we need to disconnect this part and put it as the last part. So we set the position, then we can start the sequence, and after all of that stuff is finished, we can just connect the flow to the next if. And we actually don't even need this if here, because we have already made the same stuff here. So we can disconnect this whole part and just move. So it should look like this. And another one, hopefully last thing we need to change, is in the head script, that we first need to move the head and then we can call the move on the other segments. So we need just to flip these two nodes. In the segment script graph, in the part where we are setting the after segment, it is actually better to be just subtracting the last position than the position of the last segment, because this is more precise. So we can just get object variable, and this is going to be the last position, so it should look like that. I also had to change some of the thresholds in the snake and blend tree, but it was nothing major. And after all of the hard work, it seems to be working as it should. There are still some things that we might need to tweak, but overall it seems to be working pretty well. We can turn into any direction and the sprites are correctly changing. In the next part we will add some basic grid generation, some borders of the map so that the snake can die, high score and so on. I hope that this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions, drop them down to the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in next videos. Bye!